Welcome back to Murderous Minds Monday, where we unravel the historic crimes and work out why people commit the murders that they do. Today's story, we're going to be covering the Hillside Stranglers. This is a case that terrorized Los Angeles in the 1970s, and it's a case that it covers two people, Kenneth Bianchi and his older cousin Angelo Buono. So today we're going to discover how these men, they were born in vastly different upbringings, become one of the most notorious serial killer duo in American history. We're going to discover what events shaped their minds and why they committed the murders that they did. So today we're going to cover the Hillside Stranglers. Let's get into the story. So as we are covering two serial killers today in one, we're going to have to do the background of both these people. First off, we're going to talk about the upbringing and early life of Kenneth Bianchi. Kenneth Alessio Bianchi was born on the 22nd of May 1951 in Rochester, New York. His mother was a 17-year-old alcoholic prostitute who put him up for adoption when he was born. So already not a great start for Kenneth. However, at 3 months old, he was adopted by his parents, Nicholas Bianchi and Frances. And there's not really anything else said until Bianchi reaches the age of 3. And on the 25th of November 1954, his mother Frances took him to the hospital when he was 3 because he wasn't sleeping and he would wet the bed on average about 5 times a night. And this was causing some issues at home. But the doctors didn't really take any notice and kind of brushed it off and said that he would grow out of this, it's what children do, and that it would get better. So his upbringing was pretty stable with his adoptive parents. However, Bianchi became a pathological liar at a very early age, and he spent a lot of his childhood daydreaming, and it was later discovered that he was actually having petite mal seizures when he was just 5. And this was what was causing these absences. However, the doctors again told his parents that these were nothing to worry about and that he would eventually grow out of them. Bianchi also had a very short fuse, even at an early age, and he was diagnosed with a passive-aggressive personality disorder. He was actually quite smart for his age. He had an IQ of 116. However, he still was an underachiever in school and didn't really stand out even with his high IQ. And then on the 2nd of January 1957, Bianchi fell off a jungle gym and fell onto his face. And no one really took any notice of this. However, in August of 1957, his mother took him to the doctors again because his eyes would roll back. But doctors again said that he would grow out of this and it was nothing to worry about. Seems like the doctors aren't really taking much notice of what's going on. Then in December of 1958, he was taken back to the doctors again because he was having urinary dribbling. And because of this, he was actually treated in a psychiatric hospital for mental problems. But even after he came out of the psychiatric hospital, he continued to have this urinary dribbling. So his mother made him wear sanitary pads. And again, in November of 1960, he was sent to another psychiatric hospital because of this. He also had tics, absenteeism, and behaviour problems. He was treated with many procedures when he was in this hospital. And by 1962, he had actually been moved to 2 separate schools. And the reason he had been moved was because he actually didn't get on with the teachers at the schools, and his mother thought that they were like holding him back and that moving schools would help him with this. So his mother sent him to a private Catholic elementary school, and in July of 1963 he pulled down a 6-year-old girl's pants, and this is the first known case where he abused a girl. Then sadly in 1964 his father Nicholas died from pneumonia, and even though he had lived with his father since 3 months old, Bianchi didn't show any kind of emotion towards the death of his father. He didn't cry or anything like that, which just seemed a little bit strange. He was only 7 years old at the time of his father's death. So now he's in high school and he is sent to Gates Chili Public High School. During his time at the high school, he dated frequently and actually joined a motorcycle club, and he got a tattoo that read Satan's Own MC. And in 1969, at the age of 18, he proposed to his girlfriend of the time, but she rejected him. Not too sure why he was rejected, but that's all that's said. He also confessed to his girlfriend at the time that he had actually killed a man and that he was involved in the Alphabet murders. However, she thought this was just a weird confession and didn't take it seriously, so she didn't report this to the police and nothing else came from this. And then in 1971, he married his high school sweetheart, Brenda Beck, but they divorced just 8 months later, as apparently she didn't meet his standards as a woman. And then Bianchi actually decided that he wanted to become a police officer, so he enrolled in the Monroe Community College to study police science and psychology, but dropped out of college after just 1 term. As you can see, there's lots of moving around different schools. He just didn't get on with education. And also in 1971, at the age of 21, he married again, but his wife leaves him after 8 months, and at this time he applied for a position in the sheriff's department but was rejected. So he's already been married twice by the age of 21, and both wives have left him after the exact same amount of time. He took a series of menial jobs, and after a while he became a security guard for a jewelry store. However, he stole from this store, are we surprised? And he was fired for stealing and giving the loot to his girlfriends. During this time, he actually proposed to that first woman again, and she rejected him again, saying that he needed to have a more stable job for her to consider the proposal. And this is the point where in 1975 he went and moved in with his older cousin Angelo Buono. So this is where the two meet. We will talk about what happens after this in a minute, but now we need to talk about Angelo Buono's early life and how the two differed, but how they ended up in the same position at the time in 1975. So he was born in Rochester, New York, the same as Kenneth, on the 5th of October 1934. So he's quite a bit older. He's 20 years older than his cousin Kenneth. And his parents were Italian immigrants who divorced when he was young. And so he moved to California with his mum and his sister after the divorce. At a very young age, he began to show signs of violence, very much like Kenneth. And he showed a high interest in sex from a very early age as well. And when he was a teenager, he claimed to his classmates that he had actually raped multiple girls, but there is absolutely no evidence for this, but he was just bragging to them that he had done this. But also, despite his high interest in sex, he was actually decent to women to begin with, like when dating them, to obtain sex, because obviously he knew he wasn't really going to get it if he wasn't decent to them. But he had a deep loathing for women and a desire to humiliate them. It's not looking good at the minute. He would call his mother a whore just at the age of 14 and would actually call her worse to her face, but we don't know what he would call her to her face because that hasn't been reported. But he was emotionally tied to her until her death in 1978. He also idolized the serial rapist Carol Chessman, aka the Red Light Bandit, considering him a hero, even though he believed that Chessman should have killed his victims after he had raped them. He also again was continuing to brag about raping women at just 14, and around this time he was actually arrested for grand theft auto and sent to a reformation school. So he's already starting his bad habits from a young age. In 1955, again like Kenneth, he married his high school sweetheart, 17-year-old Geraldine Vinnell, who was already pregnant with his child. However, he left her less than a week later, and when his child was born, they called him Michael, but he refused to pay child support and also refused to allow his son to actually call him dad, which is just so sick and twisted. I don't know why that kind of makes me feel really weird. So later on, he married Mary Castillo, who he also impregnated, and they had another son in the early 1956. Angelo Anthony Buono, and she gave birth every year or two. So by 1962, he had Peter Buono, who was born in 1957, Danny Buono, who was born in 1958, Louis Buono, who was born in 1960, and Grace Buono, who was born in 1962. I will give you a trigger warning. This case does get a lot worse from this point. So if you don't want to listen to that kind of stuff, I would click off now. We are going to talk about the sexual abuse of a child. In 1964, it is believed that Buono had raped his 2-year-old daughter, Grace. And although there isn't enough information from sources to elaborate on this incident, Mary filed for divorce that same year because he had also been violent towards her. In the first year of their marriage, Angelo had actually tied Mary to the bed, spread-eagled, tying her to the bedpost and raped her. And this rape was so violent that she was left afraid that he was going to actually murder her. However, Angelo was not a man to be denied. Although he didn't drink, so drinking wasn't the issue, he beat and kicked her when she failed to please him, and far from caring whether the children witnessed his beatings, he seemed to want them to watch her being beaten, which is disgusting. After his divorce, Angelo again successfully avoided paying any child support to Mary for the kids that they had together. And Mary actually had to go on to welfare to feed her children, because obviously now she's a single mum of 5 kids. But she did go to see Angelo a little bit later on to try and reconcile the situation. However, he handcuffed her, shoved a gun to her stomach and threatened to kill her. And that was the last time that Mary ever tried to reconcile with Angelo. So now we move on to 1965, and Angelo moves in with a 25-year-old mother of 2 children named Nanette Campino, and they actually had a child together in 1967 called Tony, and another child in 1969 called Sam. So at this point he has 8 children to 3 different women. She was treated exactly the same as Mary was, so raped, scared, threatened to kill her, but she stayed because he made it clear that he would kill her if she didn't. But by 1971, Nanette decided to risk it all to get away from Angelo because he had begun to abuse her 14-year-old daughter. Angelo apparently said that she needed breaking in, and Angelo bragged to his friends that he'd actually raped his 14-year-old stepdaughter and then turned him over to his sons for pleasure. But we don't know if this is true or not. Obviously, Angelo likes to brag about things like this, but either way, Nanette left him and took her children. On an unspecified date, Buono was arrested for stealing cars, again grand theft auto, and sentenced to 1 year in prison. However, due to his large family, obviously by this time he has 8 children, he had a suspended sentence so that he could work to support them, even though he was paying no child support. Campino later divorced him in 1971, and like his previous 2 wives, not only because he was abusing her, but also because he raped her daughter. These men like to get married, I will say that, because a year later, Buono married again, a woman named Deborah Taylor. They never lived together and never got around to getting a divorce. So it's very weird. There's nothing else known about her, but it's very strange that that happened. In 1975, he also became a car upholsterer, and despite his physical appearance and abusive behaviour, he was actually considered very attractive to women. Through some streak of perversity, young girls were attracted to Angelo. He was cocky, independent, direct, and very, very much in charge. He was actually a magnet to teenage girls in the neighbourhood. They were usually naive and had no idea about sex, so he had no trouble convincing them to do his outrageous demands and make them think that that was normal. During that time, Buono frequently forced women to perform oral sex on him and also started dating a teenage girl who he impregnated twice. Like we said, 1975, Kenneth Bianchi had moved in with Angelo, and Angelo began to teach Kenneth how to use fake police ID to abuse their power and get women, and also to get free sex from prostitutes. Kenneth was short on money at this time, so the two hatched a plan to abuse and get 2 girls who are prostitutes to work for them, basically becoming pimps. Kenneth was quite charming, and he would use this charm to recruit the girls, and Angelo's connections could be used to get the customers, because obviously he was part of the community and knew the people that would pay for these prostitutes. The two influenced and caught two teenage prostitutes, Sabra Hannon and Becky Spears, and they were forced to prostitute themselves or be subject to severe physical punishment if they didn't. They were actually virtually being held prisoners and just forced to have sex with any person that Kenny or Angelo brought to them. However, not long after the two were kidnapped, the girls escaped and the cousins again were left wondering what they were going to do for money. During this time, Kenneth Bianchi had applied for jobs at two different local police departments, but neither had any open positions, and he got a job at a title company and spent his first paycheck on an apartment and a Cadillac. However, this was repossessed after he lost his income from being a pimp. So once those girls ran away, these were repossessed. So since he had nowhere to live, Kenny moved in with another woman. He moved in with Kelly Boyd, who he met at work. And in May of 1977, she announced that she was pregnant with his child. And although he did try to marry her, she rejected his proposal but did stay with Bianchi. We haven't even got to the worst of this yet. This is all still before they've committed any murders. So the two then hatched another idea and said that they needed to get some more money, and they soon met a sex worker, Deborah Noble, and Yolanda Washington, who agreed to sell them a list of customers. However, they would soon find out that this list was fake. This is where their murderous side would come out. Consumed with their rage, they drove to where Yolanda Washington worked, as she had actually told them her place of work. They then kidnapped her, raped her and murdered her. She was only 19 years old and she was found on the 18th of October 1977. So this is where their murderous side came out and when they started murdering more women. And just 2 weeks after killing Yolanda, their next victim was 15-year-old Judith Lynn Miller. She was a former student of Hollywood High School, and after she dropped out, she had become a runaway and a small-time sex worker. Kenny and Angelo, again, they disguised themselves as police officers, arrested her before they kidnapped her. And the same as Yolanda, they raped and murdered her just for being a sex worker. Her body was discovered on the 1st of November 1977, 12 miles north of downtown LA, and she was found naked, face up in a middle class area. Again, she was only 15 years old. The next murder that the two would commit was that of 21-year-old waitress Lisa Castin, and she was discovered near the Chevy Case Country Club in Glendale. Like Miller, her body bore 5 points, neck, wrist and ankles ligature marks. So she had been tied up and kidnapped. She also showed signs of having been strangled and brutally raped. Castin worked full-time and also worked as a dancer in an all-female dance and cabaret troupe. So unlike their last victim, Castin was not a prostitute, drug user or runaway. So they're kind of just attacking women at this point. The Stranglers followed Castin after she was seen driving home from work. They pulled her over and told her that they were detectives. They then went on to handcuff her and told her that they needed to take her in for questioning, where they raped and murdered her. So in the midst of their killings, they actually let someone go and decided not to follow up with their plan. In November of 1977, Catherine Lure was a 29-year-old and is the daughter of the Hollywood icon Peter Lure. She was stopped by the two as she was walking down the street, and they showed their badges, obviously pretending to be police officers, as they have done, and then asked her for identification. Bianchi would later confess that when she opened her wallet, he saw the picture of her father and realised who she was. However, they still planned to lure her into the car, but she told them that she had an appointment down the block and so they spared her. She was only made aware that she'd had an interaction with the Hillside Stranglers after it was mentioned by Bianchi after his arrest. So she had no idea that this had happened. Then on Sunday, the 13th of November, 1977, so all these deaths and murders are happening very close together at this point, 2 girls were discovered. 12-year-old Dolores Ann, or Dolly Capida, and 14-year-old Sonia Marie Johnson. They boarded a bus in front of the Eagle Rock Plaza on Colorado Boulevard and headed home. The last time they were seen was getting off the bus on York Boulevard and North Avenue 46, and they were approached by a 2-tone sedan, and this sedan reportedly had 2 men inside. Their 2 corpses were discovered by a 9-year-old boy who was treasure hunting in a trash heap on a hillside near Dodger Stadium on November 20th, 1977. Both girls' bodies had already begun to decompose, and it was determined that they had been strangled and raped. So at this point, they've claimed 4 victims. On November 20th of 1977, hikers found the body of 20-year-old Krista Weckler, a quiet, unassuming honour student at the Art Center College of Design. Weckler was discovered on a hillside between Glendale and Eagle Rock. The typical ligature marks were on her wrist, ankles and neck, and when they turned her over, there were bruises observed on her breast and blood oozed from her rectum. Unlike the first 3 victims, there were 2 puncture marks on her arm, but no signs of any needle tracks that indicated that she was a drug addict. And it was later determined that Weckler had been injected with Windex, a common ammonia-based window and glass hard surface cleaner. So they're killing these women in different ways at this point. So these 2 are just going on a killing spree, and it's just insane how they haven't been caught yet. On the 23rd of November, so just 3 days later, the body of a decomposed 28-year-old Evelyn Jane King was discovered. She was an aspiring actress who had gone missing on the 9th of November, and she was discovered near the bushes near Los Feliz Boulevard, off ramp of the Golden State Freeway. Because she was so severely decomposed, it prevented determination as to whether she had been raped or tortured, but she had been strangled like the others. And the police then put together a task force to locate the killers who had been dubbed the Hillside Strangler, because at this time they just thought it was one person that was committing all of these murders. On the 29th of December 1977, police found the body of 17-year-old Lauren Rowe Wagner, a business student who lived with her parents, and she was discovered in the hills of Los Angeles. She had ligature marks on her neck, ankles and wrists like the previous people that they discovered, and there were also burn marks on her hands indicating that she was tortured. Lauren's parents had expected her to come home before midnight, and the next morning when they found the car parked across the street with the door ajar, her father questioned the neighbours. He found that a woman who lived in the house where Lauren's car had been parked saw her abduction. This woman stated that she saw 2 men, one was tall and young and the other was older and shorter with bushy hair. She stated that she heard Wagner cry out, "You won't get away with this," during her abduction, but she did not phone the police. For some reason, just infuriates me. Why did she saw this happening and didn't phone anyone to tell anyone? Like, that's just insane. On the 14th of December 1977, the naked body of a 17-year-old prostitute, Kimberly Diane Martin, which also showed signs of torture, was found on a deserted lot near Los Angeles City Hall. Martin had previously joined a call girl agency because she feared exposing herself on the streets with the strangler on the loose. The killers happened to call the place that she worked, and she was the call girl who's dispatched. When the police investigated the apartment she had been dispatched to, they found it vacant and broken into. The body of the final Hillside Strangler victim was discovered in Los Angeles on the 17th of February 1978, when a helicopter pilot spotted an orange Datsun abandoned midway down a cliff on the Angeles Crest Highway. Police responded to the scene and discovered the nude body of that car's owner, 20-year-old Cindy Lee Hudspeth, a student and part-time waitress, and she was in the trunk of the car. Her corpse again showed signs of ligature marks, and she had been raped and tortured. She had been strangled and her body placed in the trunk of her car, which was then pushed off the cliff. Hudspeth's murder had initially been unplanned. Bianchi had arrived at Buono's upholstery shop at closing time on the 16th of February to discover Hudspeth in the company of Buono discussing upholstery for the car. The two men had a private discussion and opted to make her their next victim. So although the media dubbed the killer the Hillside Strangler, as you can see, the men cruelly experimented with various murder methods, such as injecting the victims with chemicals, attempting to electrocute them, and placing one woman's head in a bag connected to a gas pipe. They also abandoned their bodies on hillsides across Los Angeles, sometimes sickeningly arranging them in taunting poses that further served to heighten their terror across the city. So they also planned how these people would be found, which is just disgusting. The first three murders that they committed didn't attract as much attention as the two wanted, but most of their victims were prostitutes, and the murder of the two girls, the 14-year-old and the 12-year-old, attracted way more attention like the two wanted. So the media nicknamed them the Hillside Strangler. However, the police suspected that there were two people committing this crime, but it has still been used in the singular as Strangler because that has stuck. By the beginning of 1978, the two had actually murdered a total of 10 women, and we think that they possibly stopped killing at this time because this is the time when Bianchi's son was born. Bianchi had also continued to apply for law enforcement jobs in the LAPD and had been brought along when officers drove around the city scouting for the killers. So he was actually involved in the hunt for himself, which is just so sick and twisted. Just makes me uncomfortable that he was spending time with these police officers and they had no idea who he was. Not long after they killed their final victim, Cindy, Bianchi left Los Angeles for Bellingham, Washington, and the trail of the Hillside Strangler seemed to go cold. If all had gone to plan, Angelo Buono may have never been caught for his heinous crimes, but Kenneth Bianchi couldn't restrain himself in Washington and he didn't have his cousin to help him. On the night that the two tried to abduct their 11th victim, the two had a very heated argument, which Bianchi revealed that he had questioned in the Hillside Strangler case. A furious Buono threatened to kill him if he didn't get out of town, and for whatever reason, he moved his family to Bellington. So that is the reason they actually moved to Washington. And he got a job as a security guard again. In January of 1979, Bianchi abducted two female Western Washington University students, Karen Mandick and Diane Wilder, took them to his house. He then raped, tortured and killed them. And he was then arrested in early 1979, not long after, for these murders. So the way that they caught him was he'd actually left behind some clues. He left it behind his car, which had Californian plates, and this was connected to the address of the Hillside Strangler victims. The next day, January 12th, he was arrested without incident. When Bianchi's photo was broadcast in the media in Los Angeles, the investigators received a call from a lawyer named David Wood, who had helped one of the two girls Buono and Bianchi had pimped escape. He tipped them about Buono, who was also arrested on October 12th of 1979. So this is the downfall of the Hillside Stranglers. Shortly before that, Bianchi had actually informed the investigators of his cousin's involvement in the murders. And during the 2 years leading up to the Hillside Strangler trial, Bianchi formed a relationship with Veronica Lynn Compton, an actress and playwright with an obsession with serial killers. And he managed to do this from behind bars. She sent him a copy of a screenplay titled The Mutilated Cutter, about a female serial killer that she had written, asking for his thoughts on the subject. She grew increasingly fixated on him until he managed to manipulate her into copycatting a Hillside Strangler murder in order to make it look like the killer was still at large. She even smuggled out some of his semen out of prison in a rubber glove. Compton lured a woman to a motel and attempted to strangle her, but was overpowered and arrested. So even behind bars, they're still trying to commit their murders and still trying to terrorize everyone. In anticipation for his 1981 trial, Bianchi prepared to mount an insanity plea, claiming to have a separate personality called Steve Walker, who had committed these murders. He was interviewed by multiple people who specialised in multiple personality disorders, and they attempted to find out whether he truly was insane, and it was eventually determined that he was faking it. He had been inventing more alter egos since he was told that it was uncommon for there to only be one. During the trial, there was a great deal of trace evidence implicating the two. There had been fibres from Buono's upholstery workshop and his home found on some of the victims. There was also an imprint of a fake police badge on his wallet, and there were hairs from rabbits he had raised on another victim. So although they thought they'd got away with it, they'd left so much evidence behind. Bianchi agreed to plead guilty and testify in his cousin's involvement in the murders, although he remained uncooperative throughout the trial. Are we surprised? In 1983, both men were found guilty of the murders that they had committed, and in spite of their cruelty of their crimes, they were spared the death penalty and they were sentenced to life in prison. Buono died of natural causes while serving his sentence in 2002, and Bianchi is still serving his life sentence at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, and he's actually going to be eligible for parole in 2025, which I don't think that they should allow him out after all of the horrendous crimes that they committed. 10 murders. Life should be life. He should die in prison. That's what I think. So I hope that when it comes up for his parole hearing, that the board thinks of that and thinks of the victims that they committed these horrendous crimes to. But that is the end of today's Murderous Minds Mondays. Let me know what you think of this case. Do you think Bianchi should be let out on parole in 2025? Do you think he's spent enough time in prison? And do you think he would actually be remorseful for the crimes that he committed? Let me know if you enjoyed this video. Give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below so you don't miss my next Murderous Minds Monday. Let me know what cases you want to hear me cover in the future. And just be careful out there, guys. You don't know who it is that you're walking past in the street. But I love you all so much. And I will see you in my next video next Monday. Bye!